Today, as we celebrate the solemnity and feast day of the Holy Family, I find it quite appropriate that all of our readings today are kind of a guidebook, so to speak, on how we are called to live as family. From all of our readings today, including the gospel, we hear about how fathers are supposed to act, how mothers are supposed to act, how sons and daughters are supposed to act, and how brothers and sisters are supposed to act, and yet we all fail. We all kind of struggle. You know, in our first reading, it is so beautiful, the relationship between a father and son and between a mother and her children as well, that God sets a father in honor over all of his children. He sets him in honor over them, that we are called to, as children, respect our fathers. And then we hear in our second reading from St. Paul to the Colossians that wives, you are to be subordinate to your husbands. Now, again, as we talked about earlier this year when we talked about this gospel, we have to look at the translation sometimes and the intention of the writer when we look at what the readings say. Specifically with this reading, because when we look at the word that's used in Spanish versus the word that's used in English, it's not be subordinate to, it's wives, respect your husband as Christ loves the church. Now, I know for me growing up, my pastor growing up would never have the second portion of today's second reading. Because he's like, oh, St. Paul, he hates women. And I mean, don't you know that telling wives to be subordinate to their husbands, that's so medieval and so old-fashioned. It's like, obviously you weren't paying attention to what the scriptures were trying to say. It wasn't saying husband's always right. If any wife believes their husband's always right, I don't know where to start. Because the same way the other way. Yeah, many times we hear in the world that happy wife, happy life, right? Well, sometimes doing what is necessary as a husband is not to make your wife happy. Don't shake your heads at me. I know. I'm going into hot water here. But sometimes the best thing that we can do, as we hear of in the readings today, outside of being holy and beloved, having heartfelt compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, bearing with one another and forgiving one another, over all of these, put on love, which is the bond of perfection. That over subordination, over obedience, is the law of love. And sometimes the most loving thing we can do is not do what our spouse wants, but instead to do what our spouse needs. Sometimes to be the most loving parents, the best thing to do is not to do what your kids want, but to teach them the discipline that they need. Now, I know that's kind of a hot topic issue, it seems like, in the 21st century to actually tell parents to parent your children, but I'm going to say it because God says it. God tells us we are supposed to be in right relationship, always going back to that virtue of love. And it all comes from the love first given to us by God, our Heavenly Father. That when He creates us out of His love, we are called to embrace it and live it out. And authentically living out love is to be obedient to our parents. As you guys know, growing up in my household, when I would see this, I knew, oh man, what did I do this time, Dad? Because Dad would always hold up the four fingers, not because the four horses of the apocalypse or the four horsemen in the WWF, but number 4, honor your father and your mother. Why? Because it's one of the commands of God that as sons and daughters of God, adopted sons and daughters of God, by being obedient to our family, to our parents, we are entering into obedience and love of God as well. Now kids are like, all right, Father, you've gone enough. Shh. I don't have to listen to my parents. You're right, you don't have to. But you also don't have to go to heaven. We have options in life. We have free will in life. And God sets before us the best path forward. He gives us these commandments not to tear us down, but in an attempt to set us free. That by loving our parents, by loving our fathers, by loving our mothers, by loving your spouse, that is the closest we can get in this life to understanding the love that God has for us. Because love is not about emotion. It's about faithfulness, fidelity, and sacrifice. That is the love we are called to have for our spouses. Now you may say, now, Father, how would you know? You aren't married. You're right, I'm not. But I do a lot of annulment cases. And I do a lot of marriage prep. And the love between a couple isn't always the love that God is calling us to have. When the two become one, it's not about what he wants, not about what she wants. It's what about, and I think this is one of those times where we can actually use an Oklahoma word and it makes sense. It's what about what y'all need. That's what's most important. What can help the couple grow together. You know, one of my favorite parts of ministry is marriage prep. And I know that sounds like very sadistic because marriage prep is really tedious at times because I get couples that come in, young couples, I get old couples. In fact, since I've been here, I think I've had 5 couples over the age of 80 that I've actually helped get married. And that's a blessing. And so you see that you think everybody is living life differently because they're coming from a different generation. No, you're all young, dumb, and stupid because we're all sinners. We all make mistakes. We all think we know better. And we all think that, well, Father, why do you even care? Well, because I love you. And my hope is every couple that I do marriage prep with, not one of them ends in divorce. So far, 9.5 years in, not one couple I prepared for marriage has ended in divorce. I think I'm up to 8 couples I've helped break up, though. But that's a success because they didn't get married and end in divorce. And you know, the longer I've been in ministry and I've been here in Western Oklahoma, I think it is so important for us to see the goodness of the sacrament of marriage. That it's not about being perfect, but it's about loving perfectly. And to love perfectly is to be obedient in sacrifice. You know, sometimes couples think that they know better than their parents, and sometimes you prove your parents right, sometimes you prove your parents wrong. That's not what it's about. It's about how can you nurture your relationship with your spouse. You know, the summer before I came out here, I started a test with my marriage prep courses, and some couples have taken me up on it, some couples haven't, because I don't mandate it. But I say, you know what? I think the best thing that you can do before you get married is go to confession to your future spouse. They're like, wait, what? I said, yeah, go to confession to your future spouse. Put it all out there on the table, and if they can still look at you and say, I love you, nothing that's going to happen down the road is going to change that. They may not like what you've done. Their idea of you may change, but we'd rather have that happen before you say I do than after you say I do. You know, I was having this conversation with one of the secretaries at McGinnis when I was still there about how there was a program that was going around the nation. It was really big back in 2018, 2019 called Exodus 90. Which was a program for a lot of men that I was asked to be a chaplain of at one point. And it was a 90-day program where no internet, no TV, no music unless it was lifting you up to God, no junk food, no sugar, AKA you're miserable for 90 days, because you're also taking cold showers. And all of that was meant to get you to get back to what is most important in life. It's not the materialism of the world, but instead it's how do we best embrace God's love. And during that time, as a chaplain, I had to be in my own group. And so my best friend, Father Aaron Foshi, and I formed a group together. We talked to each other every day, did morning prayer, evening prayer, via the phone every day. But also we began to go to confession to each other on a weekly basis. And that's when I began to really understand the beauty of the sacrament of reconciliation. That it's not about keeping secret and keeping hidden my sinful past, but instead it's about putting out there what God already knows and saying, Lord, I am a sinner. I am so sorry. I cannot change without your grace, your peace, and your mercy. In fact, I need someone to aid me in that. And so I began during that year, when we were doing Exodus 90, to not only go to confession on a weekly basis, but everything that I was about to confess in confession, I'd bring up outside of confession to my confessor. And you may say, well, why would you do that? Well, because what we keep in confession, we forget many times, is covered under the seal of confession. Which means if you come to me for confession, and it wasn't done in a public setting, and someone comes to me and say, hey, did so-and-so go to confession today? I can't say yay or nay without potentially breaking the seal of confession. If you come to confession to me, and any priest, anything that you say is not only bound by secrecy, but I can't act on anything even if you don't know about it outside of the confessional. Basically, as soon as I walk out that door, mind wipe. Because if I act on anything that I have learned in the confessional, I am breaking the seal of confession. I have automatically excommunicated myself from the church, and my soul at that point is damned to hell. I love you, but not enough to go to hell for you. And so when we keep things in the confessional and don't bring them outside to actually try and grow, we aren't really embracing the grace that's being offered in the sacrament. And so I was telling this to one of the secretaries at McGinnis, and she said, man, I wish I could have a relationship like that with someone in my life where I could tell them everything and they could help me grow. I said, how long have you been married? She said, 45 years. We'll start now. Oh, I could never tell my husband everything. That's the problem. We have so much fear in our relationships that we don't truly embrace what the relationship is about. Husbands and wives, listen to me. Your number one priority in your marriage is to get your spouse to heaven. That's it. Let me say that one more time. Your number one priority in the sacrament of marriage is to get your spouse to heaven. So why would I recommend then going to confession to each other? Because if you don't know each other's sins, how are you supposed to help each other break those bonds of sin and escape the slavery to sin? When we celebrate this great feast of the Holy Family, we can see in their imperfections an opportunity for us to be perfected. Joseph wasn't a perfect husband. He wasn't a perfect father. Mary wasn't a perfect mother in the idea of what a mother is. She left her son, as we hear in today's gospel, for 3 days by himself. So if you've ever left your kid at Walmart, you're in good company. If you've ever left them at JCPenney's or Sears or Target or the Quick Stop or wherever and forgot them, you're in good company. But learn from your mistakes. That life is all about how we learn and live and grow. And not based on the virtues of the world, but based on the love of God. And it begins with obedience. How are we obedient to the love of God? How are we obedient to his commandments? Oh, Father, well, I really don't need to go to confession. I haven't killed anybody. I haven't had relations outside of marriage, to which I say, good. But what have you done that hasn't really embraced the obedience and the love that we're called to as sons and daughters of God? Well, I really haven't done anything. Really? How often do you get together at wherever it is, coffee shop, insert coffee shop, and talk with your friends about what's going on in town? Well, now, Father, that's not really sinful. Gossip's not sinful. Since when? Well, we aren't really gossiping. We're just kind of talking about what's going on. And really, there's no detraction there at all. Well, I guess technically. And to get to that place and to get back, what was the speed limit? How fast were you going? Now, Father, I didn't get pulled over. Just because you didn't get caught doesn't mean it's not a sin. Just means it's a sin you got away with. Ironically, though, the sins we get away with are the ones that do more harm to us because we don't allow ourselves to learn from them and to grow out of them. So, my brothers and sisters, as we celebrate this great solemnity of the Holy Family, maybe listen to the advice given to us in our scriptures today. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Wives, be obedient to your husbands. Respect your husbands. Be subordinate to your husbands as the church is called to be to God. Children, don't provoke your parents. Parents, don't provoke your children. I know it's nice to pick on them sometimes. That's not what it's talking about there. And at the end of the day, that line from St. Paul to the Colossians, I think, is so important. Over all of these, put on love. That is the bond of perfection. And let the peace of Christ control your hearts, the peace into which you were all called in one body, and be thankful.